At 3:47 a.m., the thermometer outside stopped reading accurately. It wasn't built for this. The manual said it could handle minus 38 degrees Fahrenheit. The manual was wrong by 9 degrees, and 9 degrees in northern Manitoba in January is the difference between a number and a condition. Marcus had been shivering for 6 hours. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind, the mechanical kind, invisible from the outside. Just the body doing its one essential job, generating heat by contracting muscle fibers in rapid, involuntary sequence, burning glucose it couldn't afford to burn, prioritizing the core at the expense of everything distant. Fingers, toes, the outer layers of skin along his thighs. He knew the science. He taught it once, briefly, at a weekend wilderness course in Vermont where the worst-case scenario was a rolled ankle and a long walk to a parking lot. He kept thinking about Vermont. At 3:52 a.m., the shivering stopped. He noticed the way you notice a sound disappearing. Not with alarm, not immediately, just a quiet subtraction where something used to be. He was sitting with his back against the eastern wall of the shelter, knees drawn to his chest, sleeping bag wrapped around him, and his brain produced one word: strange. Not wrong, not dangerous, not move right now or they will find you in April. Strange. That was the word his brain gave him, and he accepted it, and that acceptance was itself the problem. The wind had been running at 47 miles per hour. He'd clocked it on the anemometer before the batteries quit. At minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit ambient, that wind chill pushed conditions into a range that meteorologists describe with clinical language: extreme danger, exposed skin freezes in under 2 minutes, and survivors describe differently or don't describe at all. The cold at that level doesn't feel sharp anymore. It feels like compression, like the atmosphere is trying to reduce you to something smaller, something that takes up less space, something easier to manage. He'd arrived at the shelter 3 days ago with a working satellite communicator, 2 weeks of food, a sleeping bag rated to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and a small titanium wood stove that had been, until 8 hours ago, the most dependable object in his life. The stovepipe joint separated somewhere in the wall cavity. He hadn't heard it. The wind was too loud for that, and he'd smelled it first. That particular ghost of wood smoke that means the draw has reversed, that the pipe is pulling heat out instead of pushing it in. By the time he located the failure, the shelter had been losing warmth through that gap for nearly 40 minutes. The fire was still burning, technically, just working in the wrong direction. He put it out. That was the first decision. He still didn't know if it was the right one. The sleeping bag was rated to minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. He was sitting inside a shelter with no insulation in 2 walls where the chinking had failed, in minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit air, with no active heat source, doing arithmetic he didn't want to finish. Rating systems assume a dry bag. His bag had been breathing with him for 6 hours, the condensation from his breath and body cycling through the interior shell, and wet insulation, even synthetic, loses somewhere between 50 and 90% of its thermal value. Synthetic performs better than down in wet conditions. That's true, but better is a relative word, and right now it was relative to nothing. He thought about his daughter, not in the way stories usually render it. No speech, no swelling sentiment, no imagined face hovering at the edges of darkness. He just thought about her, the way she held her spoon wrong every single morning, the particular wrong angle of the handle against her palm, the way his wife had been trying to correct it for 3 years without making a dent. He thought about that spoon, the specific wrongness of how she gripped it. Then he heard something in the wall. Not wind. Something settling, something shifting inside the structure. A sound that lasted maybe 2 seconds and then stopped and left nothing behind except the understanding that the shelter was doing something he hadn't accounted for. He didn't move. He listened. Nothing followed. He stood up. Movement generates heat. That's the first principle, the oldest one, the one that predates the science by about 40,000 years. But cold interferes with the decision to move before the body ever has a chance to move. It doesn't make you stupid, not exactly. Creates distance. A slight remove between thought and action, like watching your own cognition from across a room, like the signals are traveling through something thicker than air. He'd read about this. He'd taught this. Still took him 4 full minutes to get to his feet. The sleeping bag dropped when he stood. He caught it. The lurch of catching it, the bend, the reach, the stumble correction, sent something almost like warmth through his shoulders. He filed that away. He started moving in the space available. Weight shifts, partial squats, arms swinging in the tight geometry of the shelter. Not pacing, not aerobic, just interrupting stillness. The distinction matters. Stillness is the enemy. Stillness lets conduction do its work, body heat bleeding into the cold floor, the cold wall, any surface with which he maintained contact. His fingers hurt. Good. Pain is perfusion. Pain is the nerve's receiving signal, which means the blood is moving, which means the circulation hasn't shut down to those tissues yet. His left thumb had stopped hurting approximately 20 minutes ago. He let that fact exist in a peripheral part of his awareness without examining it directly. The way you don't look at something that might change if you look. The satellite communicator had transmitted one message before the battery failed. He'd written, "Shelter damaged. Stove out. Will shelter in place and wait for weather break." He'd reread it 3 times before sending. 16 years as a technical writer, he was still editing syntax in a collapsing shelter at -40 degrees Fahrenheit. There was something almost funny about that. Almost. His wife had received it. The device confirmed delivery before it died, which meant she was awake right now, somewhere south and warm, probably at the kitchen table, probably with her phone face up in front of her, probably not sleeping. He thought about sending another message and then remembered the device was dead and kept moving. At 4:11 a.m., he found the candle. It was in the outer pocket of the kit he'd stopped opening 3 days ago because 3 days ago everything had been working and he'd had no reason to inventory emergency supplies he didn't yet need. One emergency candle. Orange packaging. The word survival in 3 languages. The kind of object that looks slightly absurd until the moment it becomes the most important thing you own. A single candle cannot heat a shelter. Anyone who's held their hand over a birthday candle knows the heat dissipates within inches. This is true. But a single candle in a reduced space, combined with a body generating roughly 80 watts of heat at rest and more during movement, combined with snow that has been packing against the exterior walls for hours. Snow which is not cold's ally but cold's insulation, which is why seeds survive under snowpack, why small animals survive under snowpack, why Inuit builders understood something about snow that modern construction eventually relearned, combined with a repositioned sleeping bag blocking. The largest wind gap in the eastern wall. The math shifts, not fixed, shifted. The difference matters. He lit it with his second-to-last match. His hands were shaking enough that the first strike skidded. He held his breath on the second, cupped his body around the match strike like a parenthesis. The flame took. He stared at it for what was probably 4 seconds. It felt like the length of something important. At 4:19 a.m., he pulled off his left glove. The color was wrong. Not the catastrophic wrong. Not black, not blistered and weeping, still early enough, but wrong in the particular way that early frostbite presents. Pale, waxy, the tissue refusing to blanch and pink back up when pressed. He pressed the pad of his right thumb against it and held it there. Conduction. Body heat. No technology. Just contact. His daughter had been born 5 weeks early. 11 days in the NICU. The nurses had been precise and almost serene about skin-to-skin contact. Kangaroo care, they called it. Explaining that a parent's body temperature could regulate an infant's core temp with an accuracy that most warming equipment couldn't match. Something about the feedback loop. Something about the body knowing what another body needs. He pressed harder. He didn't make the connection consciously. It happened below the level of language. At 4:29 a.m., the door moved, not from wind, from pressure. The drift outside had been building incrementally for hours and had reached a structural threshold. And now the door, inward swinging, plank construction, iron hinges that had worked fine in three-season conditions, was bowing along its lower third. A small bow, maybe 2 centimeters. Enough. If it failed, the shelter failed. There was no second door. There was no plan B behind plan B. He put his back against it. Just his body weight. Sat down on the floor with his spine against the wood. The candle on the floor in front of him throwing light that barely reached the opposite wall. The sleeping bag across his shoulders like a cape. There was no dramatic moment here. No score. Just the wind, and the soft, sustained creak of stressed wood, and the flame bending slightly in the draft that came through the door's frame, and Marcus on the floor, holding a door shut with his back, at 4:29 in the morning, in northern Manitoba, with 1 candle and 1 match left. The door pressed against him. He pressed back. He'd had the pocket knife for 11 years. His father had given it at a camping trip when Marcus was 32 and had never camped before. Had grown up in Columbus. Had spent his adult life moving between offices and apartments and the occasional hotel room. His father had pressed the knife into his hand without ceremony, without a speech, and said, "Keep it sharp." He'd meant it as character advice. Marcus had taken it literally and sharpened the blade every few months and used it almost exclusively to open packages. The blade was engraved with the year his father died. He wasn't thinking about the knife, but at some point he couldn't reconstruct exactly when he'd taken it from his belt. It was in his hand. He was aware of its weight and the particular texture of the handle and the year engraved on the blade, catching what little light the candle gave. At 4:47 a.m., he started singing, quietly, under his breath. Not a song his daughter would have recognized. Something half-remembered from a car radio in 1994. A song he'd never known all the words to, humming the gaps. It was faintly embarrassing even alone. Even in this, he noticed the embarrassment and recognized it as a good sign. Embarrassment requires self-awareness. Self-awareness requires cognition. Cognition requires a functioning brain. A functioning brain requires a surviving core. He kept singing. His left thumb had started to hurt again. He stopped mid-hum when he noticed. Just stopped. Closed his eyes. The pain was thin and mean and came in pulses, and it was, without question, the best sensation he'd experienced in hours. He pressed his right thumb against it again anyway. Old habit. Old instinct from a NICU corridor. The candle flame bent toward him. He'd shifted position slightly, and the convection from his body heat was reaching the flame. The heat he was generating was affecting the air around him. The system was working. Small scale, barely measurable, but working. At 5:03 a.m., something changed outside. Not the wind dropping, the wind didn't drop. Something structural. The drift settling, redistributing its own mass. He felt the pressure on the door change through his back. Not less pressure, different pressure, lower and wider, the drift's center of gravity shifting downward. He waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The bow in the door reduced. Fractionally. The wood finding a new equilibrium. The drift becoming a brace instead of a ram. He waited another 2 minutes before moving away from the door. He did it slowly, incrementally, keeping one hand on the wood, like leaving a room where someone is sleeping. The door held. He stood in the center of the shelter and understood that the drift had sealed the lower half of the door from outside, which meant the door was now braced, which meant the door was no longer the crisis, which meant he needed to find the next crisis before it found him. There's a particular cognitive trap in survival situations. Every time one threat resolves, the nervous system produces something like relief, and relief produces something like relaxation, and relaxation in extreme cold is a direction you cannot afford to travel. He started moving again. At 5:17 a.m., he carved his daughter's name into the wall. He didn't plan it. The knife was in his hand. The wood was there. He began with the N and didn't stop until he had all 4 letters. Nora. Shallow cuts, angled to catch light. He worked slowly because his hands required him to. The fine motor control of the fingers degraded enough that each letter took longer than it should have. The carving took 14 minutes. He stayed warm doing it. He didn't examine why he'd done it. Didn't frame it. Just looked at it for a moment when he was finished. The 4 letters rough-edged and uneven in the log, his father's knife in his hand, and then he put the knife away and returned to moving. At 5:44 a.m., the candle began to gutter. Not from a draft. From itself. The wick drowning in its own pool of wax. The flame dropping from a steady point to a flickering disk. He'd watched enough candles to recognize the behavior. 3 minutes, maybe 4, before it either recovered or went out. He held his breath. He didn't have another match. He had 1 match left, and if the candle recovered he wouldn't need it, and if the candle died he would. The flame dipped to almost nothing. He brought his hands close, cupped them around the candle without touching. Not warming it, not interfering with the oxygen, just reducing the thermal gradient around the flame's immediate environment by fractions of a degree. The wax pool cooled slightly. The wick lifted. The flame came back. Small. Reduced. But there. He exhaled. There's a cognitive state that some researchers in cold weather medicine describe but rarely name. A clarity that arrives after prolonged physiological stress, after the body has committed fully to survival and the noise of ordinary cognition falls away. Not warmth, not comfort, just precision. The mind stripped of everything non-essential and left with what remains. Base camp consciousness, some instructors call it. You never know you're in it while you're in it. Marcus was in it at 5:51 a.m. when he recognized that the shelter's eastern and western walls were creating a convection pattern. Warm air from his body rising, cold air pooling near the floor, the candle flame deflecting consistently toward the eastern gap despite the wind running west. Which meant there was a heat differential between the walls. Which meant the eastern wall, despite the gap he'd stuffed with sleeping bag, was colder than the western wall. Which meant he'd been sitting against the colder wall for hours. He moved to the western wall. The difference was probably 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Maybe 3 degrees Fahrenheit. In any other context, that's nothing. Right now, it was the only resource he hadn't yet used. At 6 a.m., the candle was still burning. The wind had changed frequency. Something in the upper register of it. Something that had been a sustained roar becoming something thinner. Not quieter, not weaker, but different in the way a storm is different when its center has passed. He'd read enough weather to know that different doesn't mean over. The backside of a system can be as dangerous as the front. Sometimes more, but different meant something had moved. He sat against the western wall, the candle between his knees, the sleeping bag across his shoulders, and he did an inventory the way you do when you've been in the dark long enough that honesty becomes the only option. Left thumb pain. Good. Left foot. Outer 2 toes. Uncertain. He couldn't tell without removing the boot, and removing the boot was not an option he was willing to take yet. He was cold but not catastrophically cold. The shivering was back. It had returned sometime around 4:50 a.m., quietly, without announcement, and he'd welcomed it. Cognition, functional. He was doing math. He was making decisions. He was noticing things. Candle, maybe 2 hours of burn left. Maybe 3. Matches, 1. He looked at the 1 remaining match and thought, I won't need that. He decided to believe it. At 6:19 a.m., he smelled something he couldn't immediately identify. Not smoke. Not the shelter. Something from outside, carried in the wind through the door's upper gap. Something mineral and faintly clean. He'd smelled it once before, years ago, at a lake house in early March, and he'd asked his father-in-law what it was, and the man had said, That's the snow changing. Not melting, not warming, just changing quality. The crystalline structure of the snowpack shifting as the storm's internal pressure altered, releasing a compound that the human nose can detect at concentrations of parts per billion. It meant something was transitioning. He wasn't sure if it was good. He held it in his lungs for a moment anyway. At 6:44 a.m., the window above the door went gray. Not bright, not hopeful, not cinematic. Just the specific gray of darkness beginning to differentiate itself from darkness. The window going from absolute black to something slightly less absolute. The kind of light that doesn't illuminate anything, just proves that light exists. He watched it. The candle was lower, the flame smaller. The western wall against his back was slightly warmer than the eastern had been, or he was warmer, or both, or neither, and he was just further through this than he'd been 3 hours ago, and that itself was a form of warmth. The Nora carved into the eastern wall caught the gray light through the window. Just barely. Just the edges of the letters. He looked at it. He thought about the spoon. The wrong angle of the handle against his daughter's palm. 3 years of gentle correction making no difference. That particular wrongness she'd probably carry into adulthood and not know where it came from. He thought, I'm gonna watch her hold that spoon wrong at breakfast. Not as a speech. Not as a vow, just as a fact he intended to make happen. At 7:02 a.m., the wind shifted. South-southwest, based on the sound profile changing in the wall gaps. The whistle in the eastern gap dropping, the door settling a half centimeter on its hinges, the drift outside making a slow groaning adjustment that he felt through the floor. South-southwest wind in a northern Manitoba winter doesn't mean warm. It means different. It means the system rotating. It means the geometry of the storm is changing. He got to his feet, slowly, every joint registering its objection. He went to the window and looked out and saw nothing but dark gray and blowing snow. Then he looked at the gap above the door, the small space where the frame didn't quite meet the wall, and saw that the snow blowing through it was moving differently. Not horizontal, slightly diagonal. The wind chill was changing. Not the temperature. Not yet. But the effective temperature, the physiological temperature, the number that determined whether exposed skin survived or didn't, that number was moving in a direction he could survive. He stood there for a while. Just stood. At 7:31 a.m., he ate. He'd forgotten about the food. That's worth noting. He'd had food in his pack for 3 days, accessible, and he'd forgotten about it the way you forget about things when the problem is acute and every cognitive resource is allocated elsewhere. He found the pack where he'd pushed it against the wall and unzipped it and ate a full day's ration of freeze-dried calories without tasting any of it, washing it down with water from the bottle he'd kept inside the sleeping bag overnight to prevent freezing. The calories hit his metabolism within minutes. Not warmth exactly. More like the furnace being given fuel it had been burning through reserves to replace. More shivering. Good shivering. The body with resources again. He ate half a second pack. More than the recommended single serving. He didn't care. At 8:14 a.m., he heard something outside. Not natural. Not wind. Not snow movement. Not the structural sounds of the shelter and drift. Something with a rhythm, pattern. He waited, came again, spaced, deliberate. He got to the door and pushed against it. The drift resisted, pushed harder, felt the snow compact and then fracture, pushed until the door opened 18 inches and he could see outside. White, wind, gray sky, and at the edge of where the visibility failed at maybe 200 meters, a yellow light blinking at regular intervals. He knew what it was. The snowmobile search teams in this region used amber warning strobes in low visibility conditions. Standard kit. He'd seen them at the outfitters when he'd arranged the trip. He made noise. Every noise he could. He hit the exterior wall with the heel of his boot. He shouted into the wind, knowing the wind would take most of it. He grabbed the emergency whistle from the kit. Still there, still working, and blew it until his lungs hurt. The yellow light continued blinking, continued blinking, then changed direction, moved toward him. He stood in the door frame, half inside and half outside, and let the wind hit him because it didn't matter anymore, because the geometry of the next hour had just fundamentally changed. And he watched the yellow light grow from a point to a shape to two shapes. Two snowmobiles, a rescue team, two people in orange suits who came up to the shelter, and the first one pulled off his balaclava and said something that Marcus couldn't hear over the wind, so he leaned closer and the man said it again. And it was, "We've been looking for you since 2 a.m. Marcus nodded. He didn't say much. He went back inside to get his pack, and he looked at the Nora in the eastern wall one more time in the light that was now morning, definite and gray and entirely sufficient, and then he shouldered the pack and walked out into the snow. The candle was still burning on the floor when he left. He'd thought about blowing it out. He left it. He made it out. But the shelter stayed with him longer than the rescue did. The specific quality of that air, that dark, those 4 letters he'd cut into a wall he'd never see again. Some part of the night wouldn't close. He didn't know yet that the shelter wasn't finished with the story. That 2 days later, in a different situation and a different structure, the problem wouldn't be the storm or the cold or even the door. It would be something quieter and more specific. A fire that was already dead before the danger fully arrived. And a body that had already started making decisions the mind hadn't yet caught up to. The next problem doesn't announce itself. That was the thing he hadn't learned yet. Hypothermia set in, and the fire had already died. If you want to know what happened next, it's right here.